Hey everybody, and welcome to Bible class. Can you join me with an open Bible in 1 Kings chapter 11? We're taking another step in our exploration of the divided kingdom. Remember, in our first lesson, we reminded ourselves that for a while, God's people were together under the reign of Saul, then David, then David's son Solomon. But when Solomon's son Rehoboam began reigning, he made a foolish decision and the kingdom began to split, right? I told you we would start talking more about this man named Jeroboam, who began reigning over what was called Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, while Rehoboam, the grandson of David, son of Solomon, began reigning over the southern kingdom of Judah. In order to understand who Jeroboam was, we've got to go back a little into the reign of Solomon, where we're introduced to Jeroboam in 1 Kings 11. Start reading with me in verse 26, where we see he was actually a servant of Solomon. He lifted up his hand against the king. Jeroboam lifted up his hand against Solomon. And this was the reason why. Solomon built the Milo and closed up the breach of the city of David, his father. So Jeroboam is a servant of Solomon who raises his hand against Solomon. As you can imagine, Solomon didn't like that. The man Jeroboam was very able, and when Solomon saw that the young man was industrious, he gave him charge over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. And at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah, listen to this, a prophet of God finds Jeroboam on the road. Ahijah had dressed himself in a new garment, and the two of them are alone together, the prophet of God and Jeroboam. Then Ahijah laid hold of the new garment that was on him, and he tore it in 12 pieces. And he says to this servant of Solomon named Jeroboam, "Take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, behold, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon, and I'm going to give you 10 tribes. But Solomon's son shall have 1 tribe for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel." Because why is God going to tear this away? Because they have forsaken me. God's people have forsaken God and worshiped these idols of the Canaanites and the Ammonites, and they haven't walked in my ways, doing what is right in my sight and keeping my statutes and my rules as David, his father, did. Nevertheless, listen to what the prophet says to Jeroboam. I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of David, my servant, whom I chose, who kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of Rehoboam's hand, and Jeroboam, I'll give 10 tribes to you. I'll take you, verse 37, you shall reign over all that your soul desires, and you, Jeroboam, shall be king over Israel. And let's listen carefully. If you will listen to all that I command you and will walk in my ways and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes and my commandments as David, my servant, did, God promises Jeroboam through this prophet, I'll be with you, I'll build you a sure house as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. I'll afflict the offspring of David because of this, but not forever. When it gets back to Solomon, what has gone on here? He sought to kill Jeroboam. But Jeroboam arose, he ran to Egypt, and he stayed way down here in Egypt until Solomon died. Well, when Solomon died, we talked in our last study, his son Rehoboam began to reign. He had a choice, right, as to who he was going to listen to, the older men or the younger men who grew up among him. And we heard he listened to the younger men, and the kingdom split, right? When Israel saw that Rehoboam wasn't going to listen, they went to the north. 10 tribes go up and they make Jeroboam the new king of Israel. So what's Jeroboam going to do? Before I turn it over to your in-person class teacher, would you read with me from 1 Kings chapter 12, beginning in verse 25, where we find Jeroboam now reigning over the northern kingdom of Israel. He built Shechem. Rehoboam is reigning down here in Jerusalem. Jeroboam is reigning up here in Shechem, and eventually Samaria becomes the capital city of this northern kingdom of Israel. While he's there, verse 26, Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, if my people go into Rehoboam's territory to worship God, then eventually they'll kill me and they'll all go back to Rehoboam, the king of Judah. So Jeroboam takes counsel and he makes 2 calves of gold. And he says to the people of Israel, you've gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Was that true? No, that wasn't true. Is that what God told Jeroboam to do? No, that's not what he told him to do. And yet he set one of these golden calves up in Bethel to the south and one way up here in Dan to the north. Then this thing became a sin. For the people went way up there as far as Dan to the north to be before one of these golden calves. Jeroboam made temples. He appointed priests who were not Levites. He appointed a feast. He offered sacrifices on the altar before these golden calves. He placed in Bethel the priests of the high places that he himself had made. He went up to the altar that he had made in Bethel. He devised all of this, listen, in his own heart and told Israel, this is what we ought to do. This is how the divided kingdom starts, with Rehoboam in the south, Jeroboam in the north. These kingdoms go on for a few hundred years. But do you remember where we started this whole study? God sent prophet after prophet after prophet, and his people, the descendants of Abraham, mocked his messengers. They despised his word. They scoffed at his prophets until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. Rehoboam in the south, Jeroboam in the north. Lots of lessons that you and I can learn. So let's talk about it together. Thanks so much for being in class. Hope you have a great rest of your class and a great rest of this week.